Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to On the Bright Line podcast, tales from recovering food addicts from the perspective of a physician, a therapist, and an off-the-wall storyteller. We are not affiliated or endorsed by Brightline Eating, and all content presented in this podcast represents our personal opinions and does not represent medical, nutritional, or psychological professional advice. Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of On the Bright Line podcast. Welcome, and we are all together again. Finally, we are all sitting in the same room, guys. It is like a miracle upon miracle upon miracles that we're all in the same room. So I'm so excited. I'm so glad to see both Bonny and Robin in person. I love you guys so much. Today's episode is unfortunately going to be a not super exciting, happy one. And so we are going to talk about grief. And the reason why we bring this up, and so many of you know, we had a fourth member of our podcast unofficially, Sprinkles the bulldog, and she has crossed the Rainbow Bridge. So we're going to talk a little bit about her, maybe tell a few crazy stories about that crazy dog. But we're also going to talk about grief and how important this is to the program, and that we all experience grief in life. Like it's none of us get to escape it.
And there's a lot of different kinds of grief.
Yeah, there's a lot of different kinds of grief. So, you know, how do you cope with that? How do you talk about that? How do you deal with that? And stay bright and stay within your program. So, Bonny, I want to hear about why you got Sprinkles and how you got Sprinkles, because I know the story because I was there, but I would love for you to tell the world about Sprinkles the bulldog.
So I had a series of unfortunate horse purchases.
Horses. Like horses.
I was horseback riding and
multiple horses.
And I had a couple of horses in a row that just ended up being, you know, very high strong, not safe horses. Little nutty. They were little nutty. The second one was drugged when I tried her out. So that was not my fault. But my animal picker is not great. I think that's a well-established fact.
Right.
So after going through that, I decided that I really love living and being able to walk and not being paralyzed. So I decided probably it just was time to not do the horse thing. And so, you know, I really enjoyed actually the challenge of showing and the fun part of that and the social part of that. And I thought, oh, you know, I'll get a dog and I'll do the dog show thing. That'll be cool. And then, you know, I love the bulldogs, but they don't seem very healthy. So maybe I could get involved in like showing and breeding a healthier bulldog. And I went to the shows for weeks and weeks and, you know, found a breeder and that had a really healthy dog. And, you know, then decided I was going to, her next litter of puppies, I was going to get a dog and show the dog. And of course, long story short, I dried her off the day she was born. Like that was pretty cool. And was all excited about learning how to show the dog. And then as soon as she started developing, she had a lot of, you know, genetic anomalies, which later also included not a great temperament. I mean, she is my dog or was my dog and loves me, but, you know, didn't really like anybody else, or any other animals or people or really anything. So
moving objects.
We love Sprinkles, but yes, she was challenging. Needless to say, no dog showing was happening. We definitely had her altered so she could not reproduce. And she became a great pet, and for us has been a great pet, and honestly was going to turn 13 on August 20th.
Wow.
So again, I dried her off the day she was born and she was getting a lot of arthritis and a little grieving along the way in the last few months because we went from going for a walk every night to she couldn't go to a walk anymore. And, you know, so like it's been coming for quite a while. So she finally, unfortunately, last week just couldn't get up. So it was her time and it went as peacefully as it could be, but it was definitely really hard. That process with a pet is just really painful and hard. And it's funny because I'm pretty solid in my program right now. I mean, I actually, we've talked about it before. I redoubled my efforts, you know, a couple months ago, and I'm like, I am rock solid with my program, going great, not having any food thought at all, just feeling really wonderful with it. And it's like the first thing I thought when I got in the car was, I really want to drink. And then I was like, got curious about like, that's interesting. Like that thought, like we talk about Susan Pierce Thompson talks about those, you know, those dry riverbeds of your prior food
Mhm.
addiction are still there. Like you're
Yeah.
not letting water in
Right.
there anymore, right? But they're still there. And if you start letting water in them, they haven't gone away. And it's like that was a deep-seated, like the old me from 4 years ago. That's
Right.
exactly what I would have
Yeah.
done.
Right.
And just to clarify, like I did not have alcoholism as one of my addictions,
Mhm.
just food.
Mhm.
But I definitely was, just that was part of my sugar intake, really,
Sure.
is having a drink every night, right?
Yeah.
And so that's the first thing I thought of. And
Mm.
and then I was able to just push that thought out. Like that's actually not going to fix any of this.
Yeah.
And I was able to very quickly get rid of it. But I thought it was very interesting that in a moment of extreme emotional pain, that popped in.
Yeah.
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 And I had to go, oh, that's okay. That's interesting. Yeah.
But it's that reality that everyone thinks that grief will bring us all closer together. And the problem is that grief actually puts a magnifying glass on the dysfunction that's already there in a family, right? So everyone that thinks, oh, we're grieving and this is going to bring us all close and we'll work through this together and won't we support each other? Nope, it's just going to magnify
Yeah.
the dysfunction that's there.
And I think when you're in any kind of extreme emotional pain,
Yep.
your subconscious wants the emotional pain to go away.
Sure.
And the part of you that used to help make that go away with food
Firefighter.
is like, I'm ready. I'm
Yeah.
here. I'm
Right,
ready to
I'm
help
here.
you.
Yeah.
I'll jump
I
in.
got you.
Right.
I know how to do this.
Right.
I can
Yes.
fix this
I know how to
right
do
now.
it.
I can give you
Yeah.
I
something
can
right
numb
now.
you.
No.
I can
Yeah.
numb it out.
Yeah.
And I just had to go, yeah, no, I actually need to feel this.
Yeah.
I need to feel it. It
Yes.
happened and I can't eat it away or drink it away or, you know what I mean? It's just, it is what it is.
That's actually not what we're supposed to do when
No.
we're having those big emotions, that we don't need to not feel them. We actually need to lean into them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, you talked about the different kinds of grief. So like,
Mhm.
like obviously there's like death and loss,
Right.
grief. Like what are the
Mhm.
other kinds of grief that, we should be aware of in our lives, obviously, as we move through this journey?
Well, and I know on, a lot of occasions we've talked about things like the changes that we're going through with our bodies, grieving things that we don't eat anymore, or grieving relationships that we're choosing not to continue on, whether that's, a romantic relationship or a friendship. It can be jobs, right? If I'm going to leave a job, even if I maybe don't love that job, I might like the people that I work with, right? If I've got a, work spouse that I'm close with, I'm going to grieve that. Moving states, whether that's right. I mean,
No, when you were talking about that, I was just thinking in my mind, I'm like, when I moved here from Texas, I wanted to get out of Texas. Like,
yes,
it was on fire.
yes.
No offense to any of our listeners in Texas,
Right,
but I was
right.
ready to leave Texas. But there was still that moment
Yeah.
of like, this has been my home for 17 years.
Yep.
17 years I lived in this place and I'm moving to a place that I've never lived before. And
Yep.
there was definitely grief there
Yep.
over even something that I wanted, like
Yes.
I wanted to be moving. I wanted to be here. I wanted to move to Washington, but yet there was still grief involved in that leaving, even though it wasn't.
Right. Because
It wasn't sadness. I mean, but it was sadness. Like, I don't know, like, how do you just,
but
how do you
it's
explain
right.
that?
So it's a primary loss. So the primary loss was you moved out of Texas, right? And that was the primary loss. But there were secondary losses along the way, right? The familiarity
Yeah.
of, knowing where the parks are,
Comfort.
the
I would
comfort,
say, yeah, the comfort.
right?
Yeah.
That there were friendships or groups that you were a part
Yeah.
of, or, there's always people that we leave behind. And so those secondary losses hit just as hard. Right. And so sometimes we understand, like Bonnie, I think you named, like even today we were talking, right, about, yes, Sprinkles isn't here. And yes, there are parts of you that are relieved that dear Sprinkles isn't, suffering or
Right.
hurting or uncomfortable anymore. But there's also the things like I remember when I lost my dog I have to go pick up the dog beds now. You know, she's not going to be sleeping in
Yeah.
her dog
The
bed.
reminders.
Right. And
Yeah,
what
and
do
I think like, yeah, my whole like pattern, I mean, she was with me all day
Yeah.
at work, right? So just as I move through the day,
yeah.
there's little moments of like, it just kind of hits you in the gut, like, oh, you know, I would normally be getting up to do whatever with sprinkles right now, and that's
Right.
not happening. And it just kind of hits you again.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And, you know, we go through that with whatever the type of loss is that we are dealing with. And it's that so many people don't acknowledge those other things as loss. But if you think about it, every struggle that we have is about grief, right? I am grieving a relationship that's not going to work out. I am grieving a relationship I will not have anymore. I am grieving a part of myself that I don't have anymore, right? That I, you know, I will periodically have injuries where I can't, you know, run or cycle like I used to. And I really grieve that.
Yeah.
That is a big part of who I am. And when when my body does not allow me to do those, I really had to acknowledge that I was grieving that.
Yeah. I think, yeah, the general, like the aging and I mean, even
Yep.
like we joke about getting over the horse thing, but you know, it was a thing I enjoyed doing, and it was I had a social group
Part of
that
who
I
you
had,
were.
part of who I was, and something that brought me great joy. And there was, you know, there's a grieving of just, you know, moving away from something because it's not safe anymore, because your body can't do it anymore.
Yep.
Well, I think that there's always, I mean, there's loss that happens in good decisions, right? I mean, I think that's what I mean,
Absolutely.
you know, like it's not always just negative or yeah, I don't know. I don't know the words that I'm trying to come up with, but like, it's not always just like, oh, you know, like death or loss or like, you know, ending of relationships that you grieve over. It's sometimes you know,
I've
this
got
is
a new
healthy-
job and I'm
this-
so excited about
It's a
the new
healthy
job.
decision I'm making, right? Like it's a healthy decision I'm
Right.
making, but there's still, like you said, there's secondary losses to that, and that those are things
Sure.
that you're going to have to grieve. So
I was reading something in the community a few weeks ago, and somebody was talking about they were about to start bright line eating, but that they were going through a physical illness and an illness and something else in their family. You know, there was just like them stuff going on.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And it's like, you know, I'm gonna start this after these things are over. And I thought to myself, it's like, you know, I feel like in my life anyway, life is just a series of, I used to joke when we had like a joyful event in my circle of coworkers, and we were celebrating like somebody getting married, and they were like, oh, it's you know, sorry to take up your time or something. I'm like, we have to take time on the joy and the celebration, right? Because life is a series of stressful events punctuated by several delightful events, and when they're the delightful events, you need to have them. So I think it's, you know, it's something to think about for all of us, and anybody out there that's thinking about starting bright line eating or has just started, and they're like trying to, you know, they're in boot camp or they've just been through that, and they're kind of in the middle of their BLE process, right? Where it's hard, right? Where you're still trying to get your food straight, you're still
getting
in
your
that
feet under
vulnerable
you.
period,
Yeah.
and then stuff happens, and like, how can we help support those folks? Because you know, the reality is just like, you know, with what I just went through, which is not as severe as having, you know, cancer or having, you know, an actual human being, loved one die. Although, you know, my dog was my family member. Just when you're going through something that heavy, and your riverbeds are still damp, right? They're not dried up yet, and they're still there. Like, how do you work through staying on your program and leaning into it? Right.
Yep.
And recognizing that actually having your food super straight is going to help you cope with that better. I think that's a real struggle for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I had a young person ask me once, we were talking about grief, and they said, like, isn't there a life hack for grief? And I'm like, no, there isn't. Right. And it's that saying that there is no way out but through it.
Right.
And you can try and go under, over, around, you can try and shove it down, and it will not go away. It will come out sideways. So the absolute best thing you can do is to actually lean into it, feel your feelings. I cannot tell you how many times people have said to me, I'm afraid if I start crying, I will never stop. And here's the good news. I've never had someone that couldn't stop crying.
Yeah.
Right. The reality is we will get through it, but that willingness to lean into it and sit with it and have a conversation with it and name it and feel it is what gets you through it.
Yeah.
Right. it's a balance. When you first start grieving, it's all about reflection. I am looking back. I am missing what I don't have. I am naming that primary loss. I am naming the secondary losses.
Yeah.
Right. As you start to move through grief, you move into a little bit, every once in a while, you start moving into what's called restoration. You're building your new normal. What will my life be without this person or this thing? Right? You find those moments where you can laugh or you plan something new. You find another person to maybe take over a role that someone else in your life had and fulfilled for you, or you take over that role, right? As a way to honor and memorialize that person. But slowly but surely, you develop a better balance of that reflection and the restoration. It's not that you'll stop crying. It's not that you ever get out of grief or over grief. You will always grieve that person. But a lot of the new language, I love Dr. Robert Niemeyer. He's a big in the grief world, and he talks about continuing bonds, right? That even though we have maybe lost a person, our bond with them continues. It doesn't go away. We never end that bond.
Interesting.
Right. And I love that because the idea that if you know someone and love someone, you can probably literally have a conversation with them in your head because you know what they would be saying to you. Right. And one of the grief rituals that I like to have people do is to create a space, whether that's physically in your house or your yard, or create a mental space where you picture them continuing to exist, right? So Bonnie, if I asked you, where would you picture Sprinkles? If you wanted to talk to Sprinkles, where would you picture Sprinkles being?
Yeah, on the porch.
On the
probably.
porch,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so that idea that if you wanted to talk to Sprinkles, you could close your eyes and sit and picture Sprinkles, sitting on the porch in the sunshine, maybe, right? Woofing her woof, farting her farts, and
Barking at the neighbors.
right. And
Get off my lawn.
and continue that conversation or tell Sprinkles what's going on in your life and your days and with the kids and continue that relationship. And we can do that for anyone that we've lost, right? I have somebody, oh yeah, I can picture Dad sitting in his recliner with his feet up and wearing that flannel shirt, good Lord, that he always wore, and so that we don't have to end that relationship. We can continue to have a relationship with that person beyond death.
Before you get into that more healing, I would say that's a healing space where you can really make space for that person and get comfortable with it, I guess, right? With your life after that loss. When you're in the beginning, when you're going through, and I don't know if we still have the Kubler-Ross stages of grief, anger.
We do. They're not stages. It's not linear.
We don't call it stages
It's
anymore.
yeah.
Okay. But, anger, bargaining.
Tasks. Yeah.
Right. Denial, acceptance.
Yeah.
In any order and back and forth, right?
Oh yeah. In the same sentence.
But when you're let's just say you're in the anger denial stage. I feel like for those of us with food addiction, that's probably the most vulnerable.
Oh, yeah.
Bargaining, I might start to say, if I never eat any sugar again, can that person come back? Maybe that would be my bargain. But I'm just thinking in the anger part.
Yep.
And, that's when my rebel, my food indulger, right. That's what's, I need help.
It's also just in the anger that the desire to stuff gets stronger because,
and in that acute grief.
I think the reality is that especially as women, like we're taught to not be angry and to hide our anger and shove our anger down. No, don't be angry. Don't take up too much.
Angry woman. Oh my goodness.
Take up too much space. You know what I mean? So I think that there's tons of layers to why that makes us really vulnerable as food addicts. But I think I'm listening to all this and I'm just thinking in my head, it's like, how do you counteract this? Well, support. Like support is the only way, whether that's through therapy, like professional therapy, or through, family connections, or, BLE support connections, whatever that looks like. I'm like, the only way, I just don't think in a vacuum it works. Like, I don't think that grieving on your own is the healthiest option, the
Oh,
healthiest version.
absolutely.
And so I think that
No matter what your addictions are, I would say. Right?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. But you know, I think that we have a lot of food addicts that listen to this podcast.
Yeah.
I think we can
Sure.
speak to that. So it's, you know, in that
Yeah.
moment,
Double down on your support.
well, that's right. Double down on your support, but you know, do the things you need to do, like the bookending, the, you know, the whatever you need to do, put your hyper, you know, your hyper vigilance in place, because it is not unusual, like Bonnie said, for during those times, that's when people break.
Yeah.
When life gets lifey, and grief is one of those instances where life is super lifey. And you know, I think I just think that the only way to make it through, yes, is to feel the feelings, but I also think that like you have to reach out for support too. You can't do it on your
Yes.
own. So
And that support one of the best things you can do to support someone who's grieving is allow them to tell the story of that loss, right? And they are going to tell that story over and over and over, because it's how we as human beings make sense of something. And we're going to tell it from this perspective, from that perspective, from that perspective. And you may need to listen to that story every day for weeks or months. And that is a wonderful way that you can really show up and sit and be present with someone in their grief.
And I think there's a lot of people in the BLE community that can do that. I think that there's, you know, I think that you have to find people in your life that will make space for you. I think that that's really important. I mean, I know I've got great friends and I know that they will always make space for me. But I mean, I get that maybe not everybody has that, but I think that that's something to look out for too.
Well, I think, you know, we have, and we've talked about this many times, but right, we have the BLE community if you're a member, but there's also a lot of unofficial BLE groups that offer support. And I think this is twofold. If you're heading into a grief event, you have a family member on hospice, you have, I don't know, you have the things going on that so many of us have going on, because we're human. And if you love anyone and you have family,
loss,
there's going to be loss, right?
Yeah, loss.
If you're heading into that, double down on reaching out for support. It is a service and a joy for people who are in the Bright Line process to give that support. It's just as joyful. So you're not bothering anybody. You're not burdening anybody.
Don't be afraid to take up
Me
space.
keeping straight in my program, it's strengthened when I can help somebody else.
Absolutely.
Right. So, and then give it back.
Right.
Right. So then take your grief experience. And when you see someone else reaching out and being vulnerable and raising their hand and saying, I don't usually do this, but I think I need extra support, you know, hop in and be that one to say, man, I have so been there. Hey, let's talk about committing your food. How's your habit stacks going? What, you know, what can I help you? You know, what kind of advice can I give you about, you know, some, you know, what did Willow call it? Exit strategy instead of
exit strategy, emergency action
plan. But you know, like, what can I do to help you with your emergency action plan? Do you have one? I think it needs to be twofold: the giving and receiving of support for grief. We're all gonna have some grief in our life, so if we all support each other, you know.
I'm going to speak as somebody who sometimes has a hard time taking up space and asking for support. I think it's hard. It is. It's difficult. It's difficult as someone who has a hyper controller part that is, you know, that has the manager that thinks they can do everything on their own, is super independent, to reach out and say, I'm not okay and I need help. You know what I mean? I'm not okay and I need help. And I will say, and I'm like, what Bonnie's saying is absolutely true. There, not only are you denying your friends the opportunity, you know, your support, the opportunity to support you, because I will tell you on the other end, they will be upset at you for not reaching out. So it's actually, it was a TikTok, Simon Sinek. There was a TikTok about him. He had a friend that was in a crisis and he said, why didn't you reach out? And she said, I did. I texted you. And he looked at the text messages and the text messages said something like, can I come over today? Or like normal everyday things. And so he's like, I didn't identify that was your cry for help. Right. And so they came up with, or I think that what he said was, is there's research that shows that if somebody could just take 8 minutes of time to like hear you out, 8 minutes, that is enough time for you to, to emotionally process and feel better. And so they made a code word, and I'm totally stealing. We talked about this in the noon Zoom, and I'm sorry I'm stealing this from everybody, but
I love it.
Simon Sinek is the one who said it originally. But the reality is that they came up with this code word or this code phrase of like, can I have 8 minutes? And so they know that if someone says, if one of them says, can I have 8 minutes? It's like stop, drop, and roll. Like, I need 8 minutes of your time. I'm having a crisis. Right. And so, I think even like talking through and using using the 8 minutes thing, that was, Simon Sinek. I think Patty is the one that brought it up in the noon Zoom. So, that's where it came from. And it was a TikTok that we saw. But I would just say, like, talk through how you can get support with your friends, like in a way, like in an emergency crisis. We haven't aired the episode with Linnea yet, but she was talking about the Marco Polo app, and that they had a Marco Polo group that was emergency only. And I just, it's going to come in a future podcast, guys. So you'll hear it, her talk about it a little bit more in depth, but I thought that was a brilliant idea that it's like, it's only for emergency. So, because for those of us who use the Marco Polo app or any of these messaging apps or WhatsApp or whatever, it can get overwhelming if there's a lot of people in a group. But if you have a subgroup that is only for like, I need somebody now, I need a support right now, that, I mean, and it just can call attention to that. I think it's a brilliant idea. Another just tip or trick for how to help support people in moments of crisis, in these moments of grief, in the best way. So, again, this is me speaking, and this might be surprising to people that like I struggle. Maybe it won't be surprising to people that I struggle to ask for help. I do, but I also struggle to take up space. And so, especially if it's like a big group support, like I sometimes struggle with like being taking up any space at all, which I know probably seems crazy considering I talk a lot, but like it's hard for me to be vulnerable in that way.
Yes.
To not show up perfectly, you know what I mean? And so I think we need to make sure that we're watching out for even the loud ones in the room, and I'm raising my hand, that there might be stuff going on that we just don't, that they're not even saying. So yeah, I think support is, I don't know how we got off on that tangent, but support.
Well, support is what you need.
Getting through grief.
Yeah. I think I'll tie it all up with a bow and just kind of say, we are all going to experience grief at some point in our lives, most of us many times.
Yeah.
From all the ways that Robin described, not just from the loss of a loved one, but the loss of a relationship, the loss of a job, the loss of our own bodily function, or all kinds of things that we're going to have to cope with, our identity. And I think if you're on this journey of bright line eating because you want to live in a sustained way, a happy, healthy life in your bright body, free from food thoughts, this takes some work in moments of grief, because those dry riverbeds are there waiting to offer you a moment of indulgence to help with very horrible pain. It's totally understandable that whatever part of you helps protect you from pain is going to show up and try to offer you anything it can. So be aware, be vigilant, prepare for it. It's going to happen.
Well, and
get support.
And the food's not going to fix anything.
It won't. I mean, it never does.
It doesn't.
But you've got to be really aware that it's going to come up.
That part is going to show up.
I'm here to help you. It's a helping part. It's not
trying
not going to hurt you.
No.
But you've got to be prepared for that. So you need to always, as you're working your program, think about building in more support, building in the reality that you may have more struggles in the future than you're having right now. And how are you going to handle that? In a healthy way.
Yeah. Robin, do you have any final thoughts on grief?
We could do 5 episodes on grief.
We could do 5. And we may, guys, we may come back and do more episodes on grief. Who knows? But I will say, I will tell one last story about Sprinkles. R.I.P. Sprinkles. When she was 8 weeks old, Bonnie brought her home, and she started coming to the office every day. And this dog, this 8-week-old little bulldog puppy, would sleep in my lap, literally sleep in my lap while I tippy tapped away on my computer. And I just remember thinking, this is going to be the sweetest thing ever to have
Right.
this cute dog, this cute bulldog in the office. This dog turned 1 year old and lost its mind.
Right.
She could identify people that were emotionally erratic
Yep.
right away.
He did.
So yeah, so it went from this sweet, cuddly little pudgy little
Mhm.
ball of fur to the queen that she was.
The diva potato. that she became.
Diva potato.
She also struggled with a food addiction.
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of weird because they say like you
Right.
pick the dog, dogs
Right.
resemble their owners. And
Right. Yep.
yep, she
Mm.
did. Bless her heart.
Yes.
We were her food indulger at the end, and we
Yes.
let her have whatever she wanted.
Yes, absolutely.
But yes,
But she is
we're gonna
not
miss
no
her.
longer in pain, and we will miss her, and we have good memories of Sprinkles, and yeah, definitely rest in peace. So,
Aw.
Alright.
yeah, that is our episode for today, guys. The grief is for real. We're all gonna have it. It's now none of us can escape loss in
Nope.
this life. So, I think that hopefully there were some tips and tricks that somebody can take away. As always, if you have any show ideas, questions, guest ideas, please send it to us at onthebrightlinepodcast@gmail.com or hit us up on our socials. Have a beautiful day. Bye bye.